What is it about the Negro? I mean, every other group that came as an immigrant somehow, not easily, but somehow got around it. Is it just the fact that Negroes are black?
White America must see that no other ethnic group has been a slave on American soil. That is one thing that other immigrant groups haven't had to face. The other thing is that the color became a stigma. American society made the Negro's color a stigma. America freed the slaves in 1863 through the Emancipation Proclamation of Abraham Lincoln, but gave the slaves no land or nothing in reality, and as a matter of fact, to get started on. At the same time, America was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest, which meant that there was a willingness to give the white peasants from Europe an economic base. And yet it refused to give its black peasants from Africa, who came here involuntarily in chains and had worked free for 244 years, any kind of economic base. And so emancipation for the Negro was really freedom to hunger. It was freedom to the winds and rains of heaven. It was freedom without food to eat or land to cultivate, and therefore it was freedom and famine at the same time. And when white Americans tell the Negro to lift himself by his own bootstraps, they don't look over the legacy of slavery and segregation. I believe we ought to do all we can and seek to lift ourselves by our own bootstraps, but it's a cruel jest to say to a bootless man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps. And many Negroes, by the thousands and millions, have been left bootless as a result of all of these years of oppression and as a result of a society that deliberately made his color a stigma and something worthless and degrading.
Welcome to the Gilchrist Experience. The reason why I played this is because that's my favorite human speaking, Martin Luther King, and he gave us an insight into the struggle of being black here in America. He mentioned 400 years of slavery, and yet every European, every immigrant, black, white, whatever color they come here with a different reference to America. They come to supposedly the land of the free, where you can do anything you want to do if you just stand tall and be proud of yourself, and you can accomplish anything. But you have to realize, as he said, each immigrant that comes here has a different view of America. Yet we were forced to come here. And yet we're always put in second place into all immigrants. All immigrants come above the native or the slave here in America. As a result, we have an immigration problem today, and yet we still have a color problem that existed for 400 years. Now, we all have our different takes on how we deal with this. This is America. But let's start off with incarceration. Being thrown in jail. All of us know somebody that we're related to, a friend of ours, caught into the injustice of incarceration. Slavery, actually, in a different tone. Yep. Legal slavery. Yep. All right? Welcome to the show, Jenna. You haven't been here in a while.
No, it's been a couple of years, huh?
Yeah, right?
Thank you for having me.
And you've been doing quite a bit. Last time I saw you at the convention, I have a little piece on you, there, but let's tell us what you've been doing. And how did this impress you? Martin Luther King talking about immigration.
I think it's interesting that you still see what he talked about that long ago being very real, and it resonates with what's happening today. With the work that I do with people who are justice involved, that is an issue, and trying to make the correlation to people who do not know the historical significance. They think that this is a current event situation. They don't realize that this is sort of an institutional or institutionalized system, systemic issue that's happening. And sort of what we see with mass incarceration is the modern day slave camp. And how it starts, and even as we look at issues of the heroin epidemic, when we had the crack epidemic.
Yes. Planned genocide.
There was mass incarceration when it was the crack epidemic. Now we're in the heroin epidemic, and other communities are being impacted. Now it's a health epidemic. Now we're concerned. Now we're looking at
opioids.
Exactly. We're looking at rehabilitation. And so when it affects other people, then all of a sudden we shouldn't lock them up. Let's look at some other alternatives. Let's look at treatment. Let's look at that. And I think we need to look at the entire diaspora, the entire system. And so my work, getting to your question, has been about advocacy and really making reentry the focus of the agenda, right? So when you have people that are dealing with mass incarceration and they've been away for 10, 20, 30 years, they've been going to the board 3, 4, 5 times, and now they're finally allowed to come home. What does coming home look like for them? And how are we as a community rising to that occasion to meet them at the door? Because they have to go somewhere. They have to live somewhere. The longer you've been away, the more that you have less of a chance of a natural support waiting for you, a loved one that's intact or a family member. So people are coming home very disenfranchised. And so my passion over the last decade has been trying to mitigate those gaps. How do we reduce that? How do we work with community and law enforcement to sort of make this work? And when you look at what Martin Luther King said, you know, how can we not let the recidivism keep perpetuating itself? What do we do to kind of redirect the pipeline? So that's sort of what I've been doing since I last saw you.
And you're preparing for your loved one to come home.
Yes, he comes home July 30th.
This year?
Yes, July 30th,
wonderful.
which ironically is on our 14-year wedding anniversary. So there's very much, it's very celebratory for us.
Oh my goodness.
The Lacquered household is very happy.
Yes.
Yes.
Amen. Great to see. And of course, Victor, you started all this stuff here at NAN with your...
He's the culprit.
Yeah, I mean, you're doing a great job. I mean, Victor and you and I have been working together since Julian came to NAN.
Yeah.
You see Julian, a youngster when he came here and grown up. Next year he'll be a senior at Morehouse. Can you imagine that?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And he came to us as we could call him a kid, right?
Yeah, 2 months ago, 2 months from now I'd be a senior, yeah.
2 months from now you'll be a
Yeah.
senior.
Semester
Fantastic.
is over.
Fantastic.
Wow.
So Victor, tell us how you started this.
Well, I guess I have to go back to the origins for me.
Being incarcerated yourself?
Being incarcerated, you know, numerous times, and coming back, and how that coming back for me was like so difficult, and really not being prepared, not having the resources
What's
that
most
necessary.
difficult? What's most difficult?
Housing. So, for me,
Of course,
you
that's
know,
for everybody.
what I'm saying, you know, it is for everybody, but it's
to apply for it.
twice as hard for somebody who's been away and incarcerated, might have lost, you know, family contacts and actually has no real tangible resources, and to have to come out and go live in a shelter after you've been away 10, 15, 20 years, maybe 25 years, and have to go live in a shelter and have to deal with that environment of being in a shelter, being around people that you don't know, people that have mental health issues, et cetera, is not a good look for somebody coming home from prison. So the housing crisis, you know, is bad, but it's twice as bad for people who have been incarcerated, along with the policies that are in place that have restrictive opportunities for people who have convictions on their records to get into housing. So back to your question about me. So when I came home, most of my family had passed away and or had moved out of state. So I had no family here when I came home, so my place of residence had to be a shelter. But in addition to having to deal with the shelter, having to deal with getting a job, okay? Having to, at that time, check the box, yes, I have a felony, and having to say, you know, well, we can't hire you, even though I was qualified and I had skills, marketable skills at the time, and it was difficult for me to get a job. So it was very difficult. So
Now,
fast
what year are we
forward.
talking?
Well, we talking like 1960 75.
Last century.
Yeah, 76, 77, somewhere around there.
So it's improved some since then?
It has improved a lot since then,
Okay.
I'd like to say. So my path that led me to do the work that I'm doing, criminal justice legislative reform, working on reentry to assist people formerly incarcerated come home, is as a result of my personal experience. Coming to the National Action Network gave me that platform to launch what my dream was to do. And thanks to Reverend Sharp, the National Action Network, when I came there and I joined, and, I told you, I knew it was going to be you. I know it was going to be you. I was going to call it. You know, they asked, you know, if there were anything that people, you know, felt that we should be talking about or something that would be needed here. And I stood up and I told them, I think that you should have a program here that would address the needs of the formerly incarcerated people coming home. And since 2009, I've been operating the Second Chance out of the National Action Network. And, you know, for the most part, dealing and helping people, connecting with the various resources and people like Jen, who's doing work like that and broaden that scope, broaden the access to different various resources. So that's basically my story in short.
All right, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take us all to a place that we're all familiar with, is the injustice of incarceration. And one of the prime examples, which everyone really knows about these days, is Kalief Browder. Let's play that piece on Kalief. I think it's number 3, is it? Kalief Browder. You've got the number, hopefully.
His own words.
You're supposed to be innocent to proven guilty, but the way the system is you're guilty till proven innocent.
Little did we know Kalief Browder was already dying inside the day we met him. At the easy age of 22, he'd already learned more about America's criminal justice system and endured more than any soul should ever have to. That's Kalief there on the floor inside Rikers Island, New York City's most notorious jail, beaten by a gang of fellow inmates, all caught on camera. At the age of 16, he was arrested and sent here for allegedly stealing a backpack.
It was like hell on earth. We were beaten, stomped by the correction officers, and they was just beating on me.
Beatings captured on surveillance video obtained by the New Yorker magazine, which first brought Kalief's story to light. In this video, we see him being escorted to the prison shower. He appears to speak to the guard, who in seconds is seen slamming him into a wall and then to the ground.
And I cried myself to sleep because it's like, I want to go home, and it's like they're not letting me go home.
To go home, Kalief's mother, Vanita Browder, needed to post bail of $3,000. Money, she said, she just didn't have.
What was your reaction when you heard that your 16-year-old boy was being sent to Rikers Island?
My heart dropped. You know, I had heard so many horror stories about Rikers, and all I could picture was him getting hurt in there.
Court records show Kalief had attempted suicide at least 6 times, spent 1,110 days behind bars, more than 800 of those in solitary confinement. His court date postponed more than 30 times. He endured all this having never been given a trial, never convicted of a crime. Finally, in June of 2013, all charges against Kalief were dismissed. But his experience exposed a troubled criminal justice system and the brutality of life behind bars.
I think at some point, almost a reckless disregard by the prosecutors in this case. They didn't care, Byron. They saw his file, they saw that he was in jail, and he'd probably take a plea, and they were hoping he'd take a plea.
The judge told me that if I plead guilty, I would be released from jail that same day, but I didn't do it. You're not gonna make me say I did something just so I could go home.
When we first met him, November of last year, he was doing better, he said. Earned his GED, started classes at Bronx Community College, pulling a 3.56 GPA. But the psychological trauma from jail had taken its toll.
And when he first came home, he would just walk the 4 corners of the driveway.
You hear animals do that have been confined to a space.
Yes, he did it. And I had to watch my baby go through all of that.
In the last year, Kalief grew depressed, deeply paranoid.
You know, deep down, I'm a mess. I feel like I'm a grown, old man.
And then 2 Saturdays ago, 2 years after his release from jail, Kalief Browder hanged himself with an air conditioner cord in his home in the Bronx. He was 22.
I didn't know what to do. Can you imagine finding your son and he's hanging with his head back?
Khalif's death made national news, and messages of outrage mixed with sympathy flooded social media. John Legend wrote in an op-ed that New York failed Khalif. Lena Dunham Instagrammed his photo and called for reform. Our interview with Khalif went viral on Facebook.
Interesting, tragic. Now, Graham and I got to know the mother, the brother, and to witness the whole pain of this, especially from the mother. The mother's standpoint was absolutely heart-wrenching. I mean, she died from heartbreak. You know, the father stepped in and wanted to grab the goodies, grab some of the money that was coming. But here's a story of a young kid, 16 years old, going out on his first night out. This is his first night out.
A birthday party, I
think. At a birthday party. And rushing it wasn't late. How it was
around 11 o'clock.
11 o'clock at night.
He had a curfew. He had to be home.
And he was a block and a half from home. And
you know, the tragedy in that, you have a system that's so corrupt. The cops knew that he didn't do it. The assistant district attorney knew that he didn't do it. And the district attorney knew that he didn't do it because the police didn't have a case to present. So for him to have spent over 1,000 days.
1,100.
Yeah. And the mother doesn't have the money. It's a first offense. There was no injury.
But the father had the money and thought he did it.
But even at that, people have walked out of arraignment with far heavier charges than someone stealing a backpack. And the present DA of the Bronx was the assistant DA on his case with the 31 dismissal, the 31 adjournments. So
that's right.
You know you don't have a case. You know that if the police can't come forward to do a trial, they're not prepared. Why are you perpetuating this injustice? And you're the assistant district attorney and DA Johnson, who was the DA. This never should have happened. He should have been home. And there are identification processes that detectives use which are illegal. I fought with co-workers and I fought with supervision. In a case with a boy, they wanted to put him in a lineup, and I said, you can't put him in a lineup because his photographs have already been viewed by the victim and the witnesses, so you can't put him in a lineup. And I fought with this sergeant, and the next day my lieutenant came after me, and I had to check him. The detective that had the case, they were looking to bring her up on insubordination because she wouldn't put the boy in a lineup. So I had to put paperwork together and put it in a sealed envelope and give it to her to protect her. And then I met with the lieutenant in the morning. I said, don't second guess me in what I'm doing. I said, the sergeant is the problem. And that boy's mother was standing in a subway station for 2 hours in the middle of the night when he could have sent an officer out to bring her into the command to sit down. If it was a white woman, they would have drove her from the Bronx to Brooklyn. Right? Right now, the trial is going on in 1PP for Pantaleo, who murdered Eric Garner.
Right.
Now, the DA, Donovan, who was in Staten Island at the time, he intentionally railroaded that case. All right, if the five of us went in a store and robbed the store, all right, and you're the lookout, and you say, well, I wasn't there, I was just outside. No, but you were the lookout, we get caught. It's called acting in concert. All right? You had 5 cops killing Eric Garner, and they're talking about Pantaleo. You had a female black sergeant who was on the scene. Every last one of them should have been charged. And the DA didn't charge anybody. But yet you got Boehner selling marijuana on the national marijuana market and getting money on stocks. And he was the Speaker of the House, and you got people sitting in prison for possession of marijuana. People in Texas doing 60 and 70 years for a small amount of marijuana. This whole system is so corrupt, even with correction. I have a young man I know, he will not work in the jails. He's a correction officer.
Oh, you told me about that.
I told you about it. He said it is so corrupt And Crooked, inside Rikers Island, he got an assignment outside of Rikers. He will not work in Rikers Island. And he's a correction officer.
Wow.
They're talking about shutting down Rikers and putting people in local jails. That's not going to correct the situation because you got the same people working there.
Inflame the situation.
The same people are working there. They want to put a 40-story building up in downtown Brooklyn on top of the Brooklyn House of Detention. They want to go 40 stories in downtown Brooklyn so people can be close to their family, you know. But who's getting paid off of that 40-story building? They have to put a building on top of a building which is already, I think, 18 or 20 stories. They're going to put more structure on top of that.
The construction will.
Sure.
And who dominates construction?
Thank you.
Well, now this young man got in trouble at 16. At 16, Julian, you were at NAN, being exposed to the civil rights movement. Young fellow, smart, and you were sharp back then.
Yeah,
at
average.
16.
Yeah.
Now you'll be 21 next month.
Yeah, 2 months from now.
2 months, all right?
Yeah.
So this is 6 years later after you came to NAN.
Yeah, it's interesting. But before I say that, I just wanted to say thank you.
How do you view this Khalid Browder situation? I mean, if that happened to you at 16?
Yeah, so I was born and raised in the
But you knew what
Bronx.
to do.
Yeah, I think a lot of it was just luck. But I just want to say thank you guys for doing the work that you're doing, that the government's not going to start coming into our communities and building black men and protecting black men and women up. It's going to be those leaders in the community that do that. So this show, what you guys are doing constantly, putting yourselves at risk for the protection of your community is admirable. And it takes immense bravery and incredible empathy and love for people to do such a thing. Because you have folks that I know who have the resources to do the exact same thing, but they are just fearful. And for you to do that is absolutely incredible.
Thank you.
No problem. And Officer Graham, thank you for telling your story. Always talking about being being an officer and seeing injustice and not being a part of the blue culture, because it is extremely tempting to join, especially being at a certain point. I'm sure you've been fearful of your life when you've been telling your
I've had
truth.
my share of threats.
And then, Mr. Gilchrist, obviously, thank you for the wonderful show and informing people about what's going on. When I think of the Khalif Browder issue, I also think about, as you're talking about corruption, with Roman Polanski, who attacked women, but due to his Hollywood money, he was able to leave the country and evade the law. I always think about how money and justice and politics tend not to mesh well. And our system seems to be fundamentally based upon money, but our politicians and some of our leaders present a false image saying that if you keep on going towards this system, you will somehow create justice, and that's not how this works. I think what works is us being leaders and being independent and having that sense of justice within ourselves and constantly challenging the system, to not be a part of it, to evade it. And as a guy that was born in the Bronx, to parents that didn't go to college, that were first generation, I mean that weren't Americans, I've had my fair share of run-ins with the police, and I was just lucky enough to not meet the wrong police officer, and I was just.
But you know how to respond, though.
I mean, a lot of young men. They have young men who went to Yale or went to these other schools that knew how to respond, but they were shot at or they were hurt. Okay. I was just lucky enough to not be in that particular situation, and I think that's an incredible issue, that young black men feel fear, and I'm sure that when I'm in a car and a police stops me, I feel fear, and that's a problem. When people are supposed to bring us protection and safety, make our heart race, and you also brought up a great point. I don't mean to overtalk, but about how the breaking up of these institutions, Rikers Island, is not going to fix the problem. We were talking about immigration before. It's like when they say abolish ICE, as if that's going to cure the issue of immigration. It's a systemic issue. It's a problem within the culture. there needs to be a cultural shift in how we talk about people who do not quote unquote look like us or behave like us. And from there, we can create new institutions that meet those new needs. Yeah.
All right, you know what I want to do? I want to run a piece from Jenna, and she talks about exactly that. I think it's item 3, the one I want to run, the 6-minute one. But that's exactly what Jenna talks about. How everybody comes here and they sort of stick to their own. And we as people born here don't have a community where we stick together as a team. And this is why we're faltering the way we are. Now the current enemy is Donald Trump. Now we all know this guy. Yeah, I mean, if you're from New York, I mean, it's shocking that the rest of the country is as stupid as they are to go for his con. I mean, we sat there and laughed at him. Nobody believed that this man could be elected president, because we all know him. How could anybody vote for this fool? We know this clown. We experienced the Central Park 5, 89. I mean, he's always been out there acting like a fool. So, and then he tore the Republican Party and put them to shame. Made them all look like patsies. And that's what he's doing to the present government. But when are they going to get tired of this? When are we going to get tired of it and do something about it and stick together as a team? So we'll lead in with Jenna, and I think, Jenna, you said a lot of important things here. So let's play this one.
I want to say that what am I doing in the space to end mass incarceration and reduce recidivism? It's clear because I'm giving space and opportunity for the voices to be heard. So we heard Catal Center talk about what they're doing, RAP talking about what they're doing, NYCHA, Just Leadership. These are all organizations that I am collaborating with to give the content and updates of what they're doing and putting it in one publication. So when someone is sitting inside a correctional facility, whether you're in the state, you're in Rikers, you're in the feds in Arizona, you should know what's happening right here where you're coming back to. You should be aware of the resources and the opportunities that are there to help you connect with your family, to get you that job, to deal with the mental health issue. Who do you go to for mental health services when you have a mental health service on the inside and you're not sure if you're going to connect to that service on the outside? What happens when you're waiting for Medicaid to kick in? If you need that medication and you're not discharged with it from the prison, what are you supposed to do for those 30 days? You need to know where these resources are. We have to connect the dots faster. We can't rely on other people to fill these gaps for us. It is on us. This is us. This is our people. This is what we do. And if we take this backseat approach that, oh, they'll figure it out, that's shame on us. Because we have an obligation to figure it out. It's us. It's our family. It's our loved ones. Even if it's no one that you're directly connected with, it's just somebody else that looks like you that needs your help. Because at the end of the day, people are not going to step outside of their own. They tend to help. I had this conversation with my son. He goes to a school that's predominantly Dominican. And he looks Dominican, but he's black. And so I told him, you know, what happens is, and I gave him a little experience, when people come from another country, they go, they find out, well, where are the people that are from where I'm from? Because those people understand their language, they understand their culture, they know everything they're from. The same way, if we moved to Paris, France, we would say, are there any New Yorkers here? Oh, and then let's take it a step forward. Oh, wait, the New Yorkers, are there people from the Bronx here? Because we're going to try to get as close to where we're from, that people understand what we're saying, what we're feeling. When we say bodega, they know what a bodega is. When we say, you know, we need a hot dog, like from the guys on the street, they understand it. It's these connections that are made. And so we can't be mad when other people connect to this. That's their community. We as black and brown people, unfortunately, don't really have a community where we can connect to. We don't understand what it means to be from a certain culture and a community. What's our values? What's our system? What is our religion? What is our faith say? We're all over the place. So there's really nothing, if you think about in this space, really incarceration is the one thing that connects us, unfortunately so. we're all in this room because we may be from different places, different cities, but we all have some connection with incarceration. And that's too bad. That's too bad that we have that to connect us as a community. So the publication, I'm gonna let you give it up, I'm gonna get mine, thank you. The publication, this newspaper, is designed to have those voices heard. And for those people who, because we live...
Thank you, Jenna.
Thank you.
You spoke for all of it.
Thank
You spoke for all
I
of
was
us.
definitely in the moment there. I can, you know, like when I'm saying stuff and I see it back, I'm like, okay, I remember saying that, but in the moment it
But
was
see,
coming
it came-
from a
it
different
came from
space. Yeah.
Your experience. you
Absolutely.
know? And that's so important, because that's how we reach each other. We do have a community. We have a community right here with the Gilchrist Experience. And I'm a product of my environment, which has been NAN for the last 20 years, 21 years. And we're all linked to the system. And we have a social system right here at the Gilchrist Experience. We bring to you information and people struggling through the system.
May I, you know, when I look back at that, I realize there's nothing, everything that I've said is spot on with what we're dealing with now with immigration and some of the other issues that we have, right? And it hurts a little bit because we as people that are black and brown, we don't all get that memo, right? We don't realize that that unfortunately is one of the common threads with all of us. And how do we redirect that so that that's not our story? It takes boots on the ground. It takes what Victor does, which is, I mean, he should have an apartment in Albany, right? Because he is always there fighting, jumping on a bus. He doesn't mind to get up there. But there's this selfless piece that goes into what do you have to do to move to the next level, right? And we kind of grew up like my grandmother was in that space. You know my grandmother, right? And so
that's how we met.
Exactly, right. And so my grandmother was in that space. My mother was in that space. I just finished my second term on a community board, Bronx Community Board 9. My grandmother and my mother both served on that same board, so I'm third generation on that board. So I know service, right? I know community. When I came back to New York, first place I went was NAN, right? When you know what you want to do, you kind of know how to affect that change. But we really don't know that. Civics is not taught in schools. These young men don't understand. These young women, they don't get what's in there now with this sort of this cyber world, cyber crimes, what's considered a crime that kids are like, oh, I was just playing with my phone. Yeah, well, you know, there are these consequences and they don't know their rights. And so we have these young kids like getting bred really early to kind of basically position them for the system. And we have to be very vigilant about what are we doing? How are we actually educating them? How are we making sure that they understand and we're supporting them every way? When something happens, how are we organizing to make sure? Because that's what happens when a kid gets picked up and they go down. You know, something happened and my son said to me, you know, he saw how something happened and he said, that's just like on that movie where we saw and the kid made a mistake and her mother was the cop. And her friend who knew who she was that picked up the kid called the mom first, right? So the girl never hit the system because the mom came in. And what he said to me was some of the stuff that I'm doing is that if I hear of something or if I know of something and someone reaches out to me, I'm reaching out to say, wait a minute, what do we need to do? Like, this kid doesn't even need to go through your, we don't even need to go that route. But when they know that you have someone that's advocating for you, and you know, when I step in a room, you already know I'm talking about reentry. It's not a question of what is she gonna say. You sort of know where I'm going. I appreciate being in the room, being invited into the rooms to have the conversation, but I am always about leveling the playing field. Anytime I step in a room, if I see any kind of inequity, injustice, my first inclination is, how do I level this out? Because my kid, this man, whomever, needs to be at a playing field where you're looking at him not by the color of his skin, but you're looking at him based on what can we do to redirect this situation so that he doesn't have to go through the system? And unfortunately, that doesn't happen enough, especially not in our communities. They go through the system, there's no one there advocating, you know, knowing who the commanding officers are of your police precinct. My son is 11 and 13 at the race for reentry this past week, and there were about 30 officers that were there, NCOs, sergeants, lieutenants. It was a lot of people that were there. My youngest son wants to be a cop. He's
Really?
like very much, yes, very much loves NYPD. My older son, not so much, right? But my younger son definitely loves.
How old is that?
He's 11.
Oh, okay.
Definitely loves that. And so when you get in that space, my 11-year-olds and even my 13-year-old, now when he has conversations with his friends, it's about, do you know who the commanding officer is of the precinct? Do you know what precinct that you're in? What precinct is the school in? What, you know, do you know who your commanding officer is? Do you know what the 3 chevrons mean? Do you know what the white shirts mean? Do you know how to read a shield? You know, because that's how you begin to engage with officers. And when officers know that you actually have some semblance of an idea of what that means, they perceive you differently. It's not like, oh, this is just some other kid. They're like, oh, okay, knowing how to speak, knowing how to respond, you know, looking them in their face when they're talking to you. Don't put your head down, put your head up in it. When he responds to you, ask you a question. And, you know, I tell my son, this is what you do. Hello, officer, my name is Chase Lackard. I'm on my way. You say where you're going. Just get it out there and up in front. I'm on my way to, and, you know, this is my ID. So that he knows the script. Unfortunately, we have to do that. We have to train our young kids to do that. Don't get flipped with the mouth. Don't say the wrong things. This is the series of events that happens. But by you literally just saying those couple of words in a sentence, looking an officer in his eyes with your head up and being clear to say, is there a problem, officer? I'm sorry, did I miss something? Now they're engaging on a different level. Anything from there, in terms of leveling it up, level 1, 2, 3, you know how they have their progression, even knowing what that is for kids. Like, you know, I just finished a police academy with NYPD, and after every session I would come home and I would say, hey, Chase, do you know this? And he's like, oh, no. And he's like, oh, Mommy, you always tell me. And I said, you know what it is? The one word that I hear is articulate. The officer was able to articulate why he did A, B, and C. So you have to know how to articulate why you did it and why that wasn't right? You have to understand, okay, he pulled me over or he stopped me. He asked me, I immediately identified myself and where I was going. He asked me for ID. I was actually giving him my ID and saying, officer, I'd like to show you my ID. No wrong moves, like being clear and being able to articulate that. And he thought that it was petty at first, and then he goes, I could see how that could go wrong real quick. And I said, because at the end of the day, you're still a young black male.
You know, Attorney General Holder said he had to do that with his own son.
Wow.
He said that at NAN about 2 or 3 years ago. He said, I'm the Attorney General of the United States, but I had to sit down with my own son because I know he can wind up dead.
Absolutely.
And then the fact that I'm the Attorney General doesn't mean anything.
He's now, black. He could come in and do something about it and actually get people in, but after that point, his son is done, right? And I think that's what we, as a community, when we talk about what are we doing, we look at Malcolm X, and when we look at Martin Luther King Jr., we look at what his words about emancipation. We're in a different age, we're in a different time, but we have to be vigilant and be willing to stand up and say things and go that extra mile and be a support mechanism, because when something happens, who do you go to? When something happens that's unjust or unjust to someone, do you know who to call?
National Action
Do
Network.
you know exactly? But does everyone know that? Do you understand what happens if you're dealing with law enforcement in the wee hours of the night? Do you know who to talk to? Because I'm talking to a white shirt, right? Because I'm not wasting my time. This is, let's get straight to it and let's figure it out. Right. And so you have to kind of know the situation that you're in and be able to call on the right people that would be available late at night to come and organize and rally on something if you were unjust, or because that immediately, they make the determination in a very short period of time how this is going to play out.
It's,
they're not waiting the next day. They kind of know based on that first couple of minutes how this is going to play out.
Well, you can see it in the Harlem community. Every young black man, I said the same thing to our grandson, Bev and I. He knows exactly what to say. He knows that yes, sir, and you smile and you don't take offense, and you live to see another day. But the arrogance and the confrontation that most kids think that they're able to get away with.
Right.
And that's what's, oh, he's picking on me. Of course he's picking on you. He's trying to rile you up. He's trying to get you to the point that you go berserk and he can lock you up.
Yeah, they always have the upper hand. You have to know that. Going in that situation, you're not going to win.
It's a psychological game.
That's it.
And it's not a game if you become the victim. When we did What to Do When Stopped by the Police, I've gone to different
How
groups.
did you handle it? How did you handle kids?
I would tell, well, with What to Do When Stopped by the Police, we put them in a scenario. They weren't listening to us, they were the program itself. So we pulled kids from the audience and we take them to the side. All right, this is what you're going to do. We have another group over there. This is what you're going to do. And we bring them together and they start acting it out. Now, you might be the cops and we're the civilians. And we've had scenarios. We give them a gun belt and these kids, they put, boom, boom, they're shooting them. This is a scenario.
Right.
And I said to a kid, I said, so, and we do an assessment after, so why did you pull your gun out? And he says, well, he wouldn't do what I told him to do. I said, oh. So, we're getting it back and forth from the audience. What about this one? Oh, no, that ain't gonna. Right. So we're very critical of cops, but here are young people doing a small skit, and they got so worked up in the skit. They're pulling their guns out and shooting. And one guy, he said, you can't shoot somebody because they won't listen to you. I said, so ladies and gentlemen, although he's black, we don't want him as a cop, do we? No. No way in the world. So it's beyond.
A psychological
they're seeing, right. They're seeing that the color of your skin is not beneficial.
Right.
You don't necessarily need a black cop. You need a human being that has empathy, compassion, and has respect for another human. That's what you need. You don't need another black cop, because we got a lot of bad black cops.
Well, if you look at that cop that beat Khalif Browder,
right there
he was
in
a
the
black
prison.
cop. Yeah.
Right?
Well, aren't we the hardest on ourselves?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think so.
That old plantation ethic.
Yeah.
It still lives. And
I mean,
Willie Lynch is very real.
I mean, this is what we're talking about here. How we treat each other.
Yeah.
I mean, this is where we have to gather forces together and understand our spirituality. I always bring this up, but the God in you. I mean,
when I
soul.
When I talk about the race for reentry, when I started, and even in the Chronicle, it's about showing the human element, the dignity and the human element of people.
Okay.
And really, reentry applies to anyone. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to be an African American or a Hispanic person, right? You could be anybody. But we see that people coming home that are black and brown have the most difficult challenges transitioning, right? That criminal history rides them for decades. It's not just a one time. There are a lot of people I know that are white, that are formerly incarcerated, and they almost never talk about it. It's not even a discussion. They have assimilated back into the community so effortlessly that is a thing of the past.
Right.
That is not what defines them today. But unfortunately, in our community, we are constantly defined, identified by our criminal history. And until we move away from that and realizing that we have to figure out another way, then we're only be focused on the labels. The labels are the only thing that matters. And so we can't see communities come together and work together because now, oh, you're that criminal. But in other communities, which are not necessarily black and brown, there could be a whole block of people that committed crimes. This one went away for the white collar crime. Oh, he did 18 months. This one went away. And again, the sentencing is ridiculous too, because they're astronomically less than people, the black and brown persuasion, right? So you could do a crime. What do we talk about? The Manafort case with the guy who stole the quarters out of the laundromat. He got the same exact time that Paul Manafort got, right? It's ridiculous. But in our world, that's the reality. And so how do we make people feel okay by going through these very ridiculous experiences and still come home and want to thrive? That's hard. It's very, very hard, but it's showing the human element that you are someone's child. Not only are you a child of God, but you are someone's child.
Amen.
You are someone's father. You are someone's brother and sister. And you made a mistake, and you have the opportunity, and you should have the opportunity to come back and live a life and not be judged by the worst mistake that you ever made. That's easier said than done. But we don't get that, and it's frustrating for me. So everything that I do is about showing the human element, the dignified way that people can go away for 20 years and be amazing when they're away in their correctional facilities, touch so many lives, come back into the community, and they just want an opportunity to live. And we gotta do better.
You know,
John White. Remember John White?
John White. Yeah.
John White on Long Island.
Right.
When those boys came to his house that night.
How many years did he spend?
Oh, yeah.
He spent less than a year.
Less.
Governor Patterson had him released, but
That's
when John was going in, you know, we're driving him to the facility, and I said, John, for whatever reason God has you going through this, he wants you there to help somebody else.
Okay.
There were two young brothers who were in downstate, in Fishkill and up in Beacon, that were going to commit suicide. And John, the deacon, counseled those young men through their depression where they didn't commit suicide. And I said to him, this is why you were there. It wasn't about you. And you know, we get caught up in a lot of stuff, but we have to look beyond our own circumstance and sometimes say, well, what can I do to help somebody else in my own travail?
Right.
What can I do to help somebody else? And John's doing fine, doing well. The guys that murdered Amadou Diallo, one of them, after he was fired by the police department, he wound up in the fire department. Pantaleo and these guys that are on trial now, the unions help these guys get another job somewhere. They do that. Regardless, I had a friend who refused to train this guy when he came to the fire department. He said, I'm not training a murderer. It's not happening. And Adam didn't train him. I think Adam might have put his papers in. He said, I'm not training him. This guy murdered somebody. What's he doing here? But depending upon who you are, you get that support. And I wanted to ask you, when you're coming home, when a guy or a woman is being released, outside of the fact, well, let's check off, do you have family, you know, where you're going to live, they're going to send you to the shelter.
Well, you know,
what help do they give them besides that?
You might bring up the case of Neil's father.
Yeah. So
Who we had, and he just slipped through our fingers. And that's a sad case.
Yeah, and just thinking about that, I'm going to try to be as quick as I can. It angers me. I mean, hurts me and it angers me.
Yeah, right?
I had the pleasure of meeting a relative of Winston that he asked me to help out in his transitional period. Unfortunately, he was residing in Bellevue Men's Shelter by the time I got to him and made the connection with him. First and foremost, he should never have been in Bellevue Men's Shelter with his issues, especially psychological issues, because Bellevue is not equipped to deal with people who have done long terms of prison sentences.
27 years.
27 years. Wow. And not equipped to deal with them psychological or trauma that they went through. And most of the time, he was incarcerated. He was held in solitary confinement. Most of the time, 27 years.
What
most
kind of medication was he on?
I have no idea. He told me he took psychotropic, because I asked him, I said, well, tell me, what did you do for your 27 years? He said, I was in solitary confinement and I took psychotropic meds. So imagine someone doing 27 years, most of that time in solitary confinement, taking psychotropic meds, being placed in Bellevue, getting no mental health treatment or any meds. It's just, you know, I mean, how does that happen first and foremost? But more importantly is that this man was released.
Tell him the problem was to get the family in to see this.
Oh, my God, that was another thing. So, I mean, you know, fortunately, I was connected with the networks that I was connected with, so I was able to make connection with one of the lead counselors at the center. And at that time, I was the only one that actually had like direct access to him to find out. And they had family that couldn't even, you know, talk to the people in there. But they were his family. They was his family. I was just somebody that they touched base with to try to help him in the transition process. And because of the fact that I had the networks that I did, I was able to facilitate that bridge. But they had the families that they couldn't even get no information from the Bellevue shelter themselves. I was the conduit by which they found out what was going on with him.
But Bellevue was making money off of his presence in that facility,
and
everybody else.
And the mere fact that they had no programs in place for him to help him medically, psychologically, or any other type of way that would have been conducive to him being re-entered. Make a long story short, I was able to get his birth certificate. He didn't even have he had been in there for about a year or so, didn't even have a birth certificate.
Wow.
I couldn't believe it. They did not help that man get a birth certificate. I did. All right, I got his birth certificate for him because without a birth certificate, you can't get nothing. And it was just like trying to pull a tooth from an elephant to get them to do something for that man. They did nothing for that man. And the sad thing about it that really, really hurts me till today when I think, and it angers me to no end, I got a phone call on a Monday or a Tuesday. And I haven't had that. The last time I seen him, we went to the Department of Health and got his birth certificate. I said, okay, listen, man, let me know what's going on, what the next step. They were supposed to do something for him. I didn't hear from him for a week. I asked Winston, have you heard from him? No, I haven't heard. Well, let me call him. Let me find out what's up. Couldn't get nobody. I got a phone call that Monday from the head social worker there. She says, Victor, she says, you know, I got some, you know, not so good news for you about James. And immediately my answer said, what do you mean? She says he passed away over the weekend. They found him in his room, expired. And it just spoke to the negligence, and I'm gonna say negligence on their part not to address his medical needs. Total negligence, and did nothing for him, but made money off of that man.
Right.
That's a crime. Somebody should be in jail for that because that's negligence.
And we're trying to get him to Barbados.
Yeah, that's
Barbados.
just one of the components
All
of
we
people
need is
dealing with
his
that.
ID, and we're going to transform. His family down there was waiting to greet him. And the system, it was so crazy, man. It was so crazy. And his mental state was that of...
he couldn't function. He couldn't function anymore.
Well, if they were drugging him all those years, we all know that solitary...
When he was offered help, we had a chance to get him out of there, and he refused to take it. He'd rather go back to the shelter. And that sort of like put everybody on.
But that's an institutionalized mentality.
Right. Yeah.
27 years being incarcerated, nonetheless, the majority of it in solitary confinement will induce that type of, you know, pattern of behavior where that's his comfort zone. What you were saying, and we have to realize in reentry, we can't move any more than the person that we're trying to advocate. We have to let them get in the driver's seat.
Right.
And we get let down when we realize that people
they don't know
they
how to
don't do what we want them to do. We're giving them everything they need. All they have to do is step through that door. And then we're saying, well, why wouldn't they do it? Well, because we have to do it based on their motivation to change, not ours, right? We have to support them in this way and then only move as fast as they are, directing them, giving them the opportunities, but also realizing that when they're not ready, you get this. Things happen where they're not able to step through that door. And that's what reentry is, this whole wellness model. It's not even just the physical piece of them being out, but it's the mental, it's the financial, it's the social, it's the, you know, emotional, but it's all these pieces that tie into that. And when we look at it that way, it changes your perspective.
So none of that is there for a person coming home.
That's the point. That the services are not there.
It's just where you're going to live, do you have a job, and good luck.
So let me say there are pockets of it. There are pockets. They don't work they don't work together.
Tandem.
So they're happening in some shape or form, perhaps. It could be a loved one on the phone doing something, a girlfriend writing a letter. It could be the ORC at the prison doing some work. It could be the chaplain doing some stuff. But whether or not they're all working in a unified fashion for that person's reentry, not necessarily.
It's just like they all pay attention when somebody's banging on the door.
Right.
That's the only time.
Right.
Like any other situation, if you don't have a little backup, man, they'll let you lay in the corner and die. And that's the system. So we just gonna have to get up, and anybody in the corner, we're gonna have to drag them out of the corner.
That's right.
And do it as a family and keep up the love energy that's here.
And we're not afraid, right?
And Victor, you give them hell in Albany. I understand you.
Yeah, I wanted to say one other thing as I was listening. There is a massive issue with bureaucracy when it comes to dealing with people who are incarcerated. And I'm looking at the case of Khalif Browder, and when he was placed in solitary confinement, one of the massive issues that led to his eventual death was that he had no one to talk to. At one point, he was there for so long, he was there 23 hours a day, for I think it was like a period of it was like over 2 months.
811 days.
Yeah. He was there, no one to talk to. He began to hear voices, and they tell him, okay, go out into the world. We're sorry we messed with you. Let's give you a check. As a result, he no longer stops hearing voices. He goes back home, hears those voices, it tortures him, and he kills himself. There is a massive issue within this country, specifically towards how we deal with black mental health. And we have insurance policies that can address, for example, you have allergies, if you have the flu, but we don't talk about what's going on within the mind. If we could have a way in which people can talk to a therapist, I think we'd be a much more progressive society. Because that's so important.
For the black man, the therapist is God. You just talk to them.
And that's
Look
the
in the
problem.
mirror and
Yeah.
talk to God. That's your therapist, you know. 'Cause that's where the love energy is going to come from. That fills your heart.
Yeah.
On my Mother's Day, I thought about my mother. My mother died when I was 22.
Wow.
And her spirit came to me on Mother's Day. And I suddenly got happy. I mean, I got so overwhelmed by all that love energy. If there's one person on this planet that was my God, it was my mama. She came to me. Peace, you know. I mean, it was so overwhelming, I just cried like a baby. Beth came and said, "What's wrong?" I said, "I was thinking about my mama.
Oh.
How much she loved me."
Yeah.
And that's my God. That's who gave me life. All right?
I wanted to say one more thing.
We got 20 seconds. That's why I was...
Oh, that's horrible.
Thank you for coming.
Okay, yeah, we not.
The God in me loves the
Yeah.
God in you, and stay tuned for more of the Gilchrist Experience. We come to you with more love energy.
Yeah.
Power to the people. We have a minute left for the Bronx.
Oh man, I was just talking about I was watching the King of the Wilderness documentary, talking about Dr. King's struggle, and then they talked about his mental health and how he couldn't go to a therapist because they were afraid that they would write what he was saying down, and it tortured him more and more and more. We really need some type of therapy within our community.
Yeah.
That's all I was saying.
And get this month's of Reentry Chronicle. Show it to him.
Oh, yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
all right.
Yes. We're
This-
trying
Is
to.
that what's over there?
Yes.
That's okay.
Yes.
You should have had that up in the beginning.
Without struggle, there's no progress.
That's
See?
right.
That's right.
That's right.
Who
So
said
stay
that?
on your-
Who said that?
Who was it?
Uh-oh.
Stuck? Are we still
Come
on
on.
there?
Right.
Frederick Douglass.
Frederick Douglass.
Okay. Give the man the cue.
That's right.
Thank you.
Power to the people. God bless. Stay tuned for more.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Frederick
Guys.
Douglass.
Thank you, man. So good
Senator.
to see you, man.
And you are
Soon to
at
be.
Morehouse?
Yes, ma'am.
My cousin just got into Morehouse. He'll be the freshman there. So
Oh,
I'd
what's
love
his
to
name?
get your Tyler.
Yeah, you
Perry.